Hi, and welcome to Health Changers across the pond and back. All of us here are passionate about helping people to change their health destiny. Today's topics, we're going to include Jayney talking about connecting to nature. I will be talking about how to begin living whole food plant-based. Gareth is going to be discussing why make significant changes. And Dr. Frank is going to be talking about the impact of diet and lifestyle on the hormonal function and the thyroid and the adrenals. So I'm excited about that. So let me introduce our amazing panel. We have Dr. Frank Sabatino, who has been plant-based for over a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, and he has been most recently working with a company called Real Deal Healthy, and they have an upcoming retreat November 1st through the 8th to do a water fast. And then he recently has completed a book called WEIGHTLESS, Compassionate Weight Loss for Life. And he has online courses, Lean for Life, The Science of Effective Weight Loss, and you can find more at drfranksabatino.com. Jayney is the president of the Complementary Medical Association, and she's one of the leading experts in natural anti-aging. I mean, please just look at the woman. I mean, you know, an integrative medicine field. She's also written quite a few bestsellers. And then we have Gareth R, can't forget that R, Davies, and he helps others to reduce and eliminate high blood pressure or their medication with his No Meds method. And you can connect with him on Facebook, Gareth R. Davies. And I am founder of Simply Plant-Based, where I have a lot of programs to help people to transition to a plant-based lifestyle. And I just recently launched the Pregnancy Advantage. So, Jayney, are you ready to jump in?
Yes, I am, Jeanne. Yes, fire away. Well, thank you very much indeed for having me. And it's absolutely fantastic and such an honor to be with you and our fellow colleagues on these amazing broadcasts that you bring together, Jeanne. So thank you so much for that. What I wanted to talk about today is something it's been really impacting my life to a very great extent in just sort of recent weeks, in fact. It's something I'm passionate about in general, but in recent weeks, this has really, really come home to me. I'm actually not at home at the moment. I'm looking after my mum, who's got some health challenges that she's going through just now. And I'm looking after her little dog. And so I'm doing doggy walking and taking dog out to we're very lucky where my mum lives. She lives in a very forested sort of area. So I've got this incredible privilege of taking this gorgeous, amazing little dog out for walks 3 times a day, usually, in the forest. And I have to say, the impact of this, for somebody who generally spends her life sitting behind a computer typing, is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I do try to get out, you know, at least once a day. And I mean, as Frank says, you know, we need to walk for at least 30 minutes, at least once a day, as an absolute minimum. And I adhere to that, so that's fine. But there's something special about actually getting out into nature, spending time in nature, getting up early, listening to the birds, and just seeing the changes. Of course, again, you know, I've got the luxury of living in Northern Europe, so I'm seeing all the beautiful changes with the autumnal leaves coming on the trees and so on, and just noticing how things are from one day to another. And it's so soul enriching. We know we know it's lovely to do all of this. We know that it makes us feel good. But you know what? There's a whole raft of research on this connection to nature. In fact, the Japanese did a wonderful study where they looked at what's called forest bathing. There's an actual Japanese term for it. And what's so interesting is that when we get out into nature, when we get into natural settings, certain changes happen within our physiological systems. So, for example, blood pressure goes down. Blood sugar actually shifts towards a more normal basis. So for people who are struggling with challenges like type 2 diabetes and so on, will notice that they are benefited tremendously by this. Inflammation comes down as well. There's a direct impact of nature upon the cytokines that express for inflammation. So inflammatory cytokines are suppressed and anti-inflammatory cytokines are actually upregulated in their activity. So that's pretty interesting, I think. And so I think the takeaway really for this part of what I wanted to talk about is if you can get out into nature, no matter what the season is or where you are, it will always have a really good impact upon you. As I was saying last time we spoke, you know, a lot of people do say, yes, well, I can't really go out because I get allergies and so on. And if you recall from my last talk that we did here, I was talking about the impact of homeopathic medicines. If you tend to be a hay fevery type of person, there are lots and lots of things that you can do to actually offset allergies. And also, as we spoke, you know, if you've got inflammation going on in your body, then you are more prone to allergies anyway. So, you know, it kind of is a virtuous circle insofar as if you get out into nature, chances are that your inflammation levels will come down and your predisposition towards allergies will also come down as a result. But there are other parts of this picture which are also very, very interesting. For example, Jeanne, here, you know, because it's autumn now, all the leaves are coming down and, you know, there's nothing quite as much fun as rustling, you know, you're walking along, rustling through all those gorgeous golden leaves on the ground. But one of the interesting things about doing that is, yes, it's fun. It reminds you of being a kid again. And of course that rewinds your body clock. But actually what happens when we do that is it throws up little microbes and little fungi into the air that we then breathe in. And what happens as a result of doing that is that these microscopic fungi and bacteria have an effect upon our sense of well-being, and they actually increase our sense of well-being. So it actually has a really interesting effect. Nobody's quite sure why it happens or what the mechanism of action actually is, but what we do know is that there is a palpable difference when we actually can get out and we can rustle through those leaves, and it is to do with the fungi and the bacteria. But also similarly, what they've noticed is that people who can get out into nature and do gardening also have a very similar benefit, regardless of the season of the year. Something about handling soil. What they feel is that, yes, there is something that is coming as you deal with soil. There is something that comes up into the atmosphere that we breathe in. Again, they believe microscopic bacteria in this particular case. But also they feel that when you're touching the earth, something else is happening, and they do believe that there may be little micro cuts on our hands and so on as we're gardening and such like, so the little bacteria do get in there. And again, these are highly beneficial bacteria that get into the system that way as well, and again make a massive difference to not just a sense of well-being but actual happiness scores. And this is all fully documented, fully researched, and just, I think, absolutely, it's just so intriguing. So of course the question inevitably that is one that comes up, which is, if we can't get out into nature, or if we live in an incredibly urban concrete environment, what do we do then? You know, we don't all have the luxury of being able to get out and be, you know, in touch with the forest and so on. Well, actually, many of these same benefits will actually accrue to people who look after houseplants. Ellen Langer, one of my people that I just follow, absolutely, she's an amazing professor. She's a professor of social psychology and psychology at Harvard. And she has actually shown in a great study in nursing homes that when they gave people houseplants to look after, they did better in every measure of health and well-being, mentally, physically, and emotionally. So there's something about nurturing something, whether it's a houseplant or a pet or what have you, does also give us that connection to something natural and something living and alive. So that's something that I would suggest people do. The last part of this that I also want to cover is a wonderful piece of research that I like to bring up when I'm teaching, which is that when we get out into a natural setting, whether it's a forest or whether it's looking at the Grand Canyon or whether it's looking at a magnificent sunset or a stunning inspirational sunrise, it cultivates within us a sense of awe. And that sense of awe is profoundly healing for us, particularly from an anti-inflammatory perspective, once again, intriguingly enough. So cultivating a sense of awe by getting out into nature is great. But again, if people say, well, I live in a concrete jungle, you know, I live in a high-rise block, I can't connect to nature. Even if people are bedridden and they can't actually physically get out. Another way of cultivating awe is by looking at inspirational artworks, or listening to a Bach oratorio, or whatever it is that turns you on and really kind of escalates and elevates that sense of awe within you, that will do the trick. That is the thing that really reduces inflammatory levels. When I was completely bedridden myself, I was locked into a fetal position. I couldn't move. The only thing I could do was get a little headset on, and I listened to music that really inspired me. I listened to Bach. I listened to Baroque music, or Baroque music, as you say, on the other side of the pond. I listened to music that inspired me. And I actually felt that it was, if it's not too presumptuous and ridiculous to say, I felt that it was rebuilding me from a cellular level on upwards. And that is truly actually how I felt. I felt like this music was just revivifying me on every level, again, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. So I would say to everybody listening that there's always a way that you can connect to nature and connect to things that are awe-inspiring. And if you do so, it will transform things within you.
Well, I'm going to jump in because my husband and I took in a foster dog, and these are dogs that come up from the South because they just euthanize them down there. So they get them on a transport. And so this woman, gets them and then farms them out to foster homes so that they can transition. So this was 60 pounds of pure energy. Just saying. I mean, incredible dog, sweet, but he needed some work. So in order for me to be able to do anything in the house, because he was right there going, hi, can we play now? Hi. He was about 2 years old and just needed a lot of, and everything was new to him. So I would start taking him out on these walks because it was the only way that I could get anything done at all. And so it was incredible, just like what you were talking about, getting out into the woods and getting out into nature. And I rediscovered a whole lot of trails around my house that I hadn't been on for a long time. And it just brought such a peace. The dog felt better. I felt better. Plus, I also have, and just what you were talking about yesterday, we were out rustling leaves. We have these linear trails that are by my house that they've transformed. They were railroad beds and they've transformed into linear parks. And so they're absolutely phenomenal. And my girlfriend and I, we were out walking yesterday. It was absolutely gorgeous, fall, crisp day, beautiful leaves on the trees already, and one of those bright blue days, just perfect days. And we were out walking, and the leaves had already covered the trail. And so as we were walking along, I can hear the rustling, and it was just phenomenal and just totally what you were saying. And I was getting a kick out of just, because the leaves, I go back to the kid, when we'd pile them up and jump into the leaves and, have fun. So it just took me back to that memory. And it was just, both of us at the end of the day were like, wow, this was a really good walk today. And now that I'm thinking about what you said about the leaves, wow, that is powerful, that we're rustling them up and breathing in. So thank you for sharing that.
Pleasure. Thanks. Thank you so much, Jeanne. Your walk sounds amazing. Perfect.
Jayney, I got a question. How did they go about measuring the happiness? That's pretty difficult thing, I would imagine, to measure.
Yeah, great question. The thing about social psychology is that it's considered to be a soft science, but they do have ways and means of actually measuring this stuff. So a lot of happiness is the research into happiness and contentment and all of those sorts of positive psychology things. They will start at a base point level with, and it's usually self-reported. So they'll use a research system, something like MyMops, which is a self-reporting questionnaire that the client or the patient fills out, or the person in the study fills out, how do you feel generally, and so they will do this, and it's done very, very scientifically, and so there is very little room for much error, and it's all become quite sophisticated. So it's sort of fill this out over several days, then they'll do the intervention, in this case either gardening or walking in nature and so on, and then the person will do the study and fill out the form at completion and so on. And so yeah, it's actually quite surprisingly rigorous. And for the viewers and the listeners, what I would say is, if they're really interested in looking into this further, group that I love to follow is called the Center for the Greater Good, and they're at Berkeley in California. They are absolutely impeccable with their research. It's world-class, absolutely outstanding. And as I also say, Ellen Langer, she's a great social psychologist, and she's also really up on doing all of these sorts of interventional trials that look at quality of life and what we can do, little changes we can do to actually make a massive impact on quality of life.
Interesting, so interesting.
One of the things that came out of even treating children with attention deficit and things of that nature were really being able to get them in natural environments for an hour or two a day has a huge impact on affecting their overall behavior and well-being. So that natural setting has impact on neurological and brain systems in ways that we're just beginning to really find out. So connecting in nature is a huge piece. And the idea of putting children in schools over the long periods of time that they are, with poor diets and so on, without the ongoing physical activity and connection to nature, almost dooms them to problems with attention deficit and issues of that kind. So yeah, it's very profound. And we all know the awe-inspiring, salutatory effects of just being in that natural world. And that's a lot of what we're about in this lifestyle.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because a lot of the European medical systems do employ nature cure. I was commissioned by several sort of former Iron Curtain country governments, and my job was to go and look at their medical spas. And you would actually get a prescription from the doctor to go and walk in the forest for however many minutes or hours or what have you. And they have different nature cure clinics according to different types of problems. So whether it's chest and pulmonary type problems, or special bathing in special waters for skin problems, psoriasis, eczema, that sort of thing, and so on. And so, yeah, this is something that's so known about in Europe. And what's really interesting is that in Northern Europe, Gareth, you'll be able to attest to this, there's quite a lot of there are quite a lot of people that do have private medical insurance. And those private medical insurance companies will actually send people to these Hungarian, Bulgarian, Romanian medical spas for 2 weeks, because that's actually cheaper than footing a medical bill for the rest of the year, because the people don't need it. They've been to the spa for 2 weeks. Their health is now stabilized pretty much for the rest of the year. They'll go off in the next year and then do it all over again. The power of nature to cure is absolutely phenomenal.
Wow, Jayney, thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, because I had not heard about, I knew, intrinsically about nature and getting out, but thank you so much.
Pleasure.
All right, let's move on, because I've had a lot of people ask me, how do I begin? How do I start this plant-based lifestyle? Most people think, it's just so easy because, you just start eating fruits and vegetables. Well, there's a little bit more to that in this whole process. So the first thing that I recommend for people is to learn about the benefits of a whole food plant-based lifestyle. Start learning to read ingredient lists, or hopefully you're going to choose foods that don't have ingredient lists, and you really need to watch and learn. The first thing is I recommend people to do is to have dinner and a movie. Make a nice plant-based dinner and watch one of the great movies. There's so many, Forks Over Knives and Game Changers, please. That's the epitome for men. Right there, that reaches right into there. I'm not going to tell you too much in case you haven't seen it, but if you do, you'll know what I'm talking about. So what are some other things? Well, I think connecting to people that are already plant-based, that's going to help. But one of the big things that you can do is to add before you subtract, because people think, oh my God, I can't have this anymore. Find recipes that are going to appeal to you. Find things, that you can incorporate more of, like more whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, plant-based milks. Learn to read nutrition labels, especially because the nutrition label has recently changed. So here in the United States, they took away some things and then they added some things. So one of the things they took away was the fat calories, which I found very interesting. But then they added the percent of sugar, which is, in terms of the daily nutritional requirement, which they didn't have before. So that was a good thing that I thought they added. But you need to understand your why, because there's a huge difference in thinking about this is a diet. This is not a diet. This is a lifestyle. And there's a big difference between a diet and a lifestyle. You also have to lose the cheat mindset, because every diet I have been on, every diet, I would try to find ways to cheat. And if I didn't find ways, the Weight Watchers, those points, I wanted to blow my brains out with those. Oh my God, trying to figure out, and I would always try to figure out, if I take my points here and move it over there, then I can have that really high caloric density cake or whatever, portion of it. But you have to lose that cheat mindset, like that. I've been good. So, I deserve this. No. And then learning the benefits to you, to the animals, obviously, on this planet, and to our planet per se, because at what we're doing, we just can't sustain what we're doing. So we have to change. So, and then be open-minded, because once you learn this, you can't go back. I mean, you just can't go back. And having this positive mindset is going to help you a lot, because you have to really think about all these amazing new foods that you're going to try. It's ridiculous, the abundance of it. Oh my gosh. Because back in the day, it was so boring, Meatloaf Monday, Taco Tuesday. Oh, no. You're going to find so many. People just think I eat so what do you eat, just salads? Well, no, I save the grass clippings and the tree bark for special occasions, No, oh my God, I am such a foodie. It's ridiculous. The food is amazing. Get excited about these changes and all these new foods that you're going to be trying. And then to plan your transition. Some people like to just jump right in. And I had a woman who, when I was teaching this at a local community college, I was doing classes on Saturday, and she started my first class, and she had such severe arthritis, and she was in such pain. I mean, really, really bad pain. At 35, she was put on pain medications, and she said the pain medication didn't help. It just made you not care. And so for 10 years, she was on such intense medication that didn't help her and didn't help her inflammation or arthritis. And she went home and jumped right in. She cleaned the house out. She started doing it. And in 5 days, she realized for the first time in 10 years that she was not in pain anymore. And that was, when she came in to tell us on the next Saturday, we passed around the box of tissues, because you learn to cry in this lifestyle. I mean, they're tears of joy, so, some people that works, jump right in. That's great. Or some people need a little bit more time, to transition, and that's perfectly all right. So, the first week, just start with changing your breakfast. Start with making it an oatmeal and put lots of great, blueberries or raspberries or some great fruit, and add a little bit of almond milk, some pumpkin pie spice, yumminess. And focus on what you're actually eating. Then maybe the second week you add in lunch. Then the third week you add in dinner. And by the fourth week, you're on autopilot already. But you have to learn how to read labels, and you have to learn how to read ingredients lists, because first of all, sugar has 57 different names. Okay. And that's what they do. It's all smoke and mirrors on the labels. So, because the labels start with the highest level of ingredient and works its way down. So in order for sugar to not be like the second or even first ingredient, what they do is they use different sugars so they can say it's a different ingredient. So, and dairy does the same thing. There's a lot of different names for dairy. So you need to be careful about learning how to read this stuff. So there's a little bit of work that you're going to have to put into. And then plan, the day of transition. Clean out everything out of the house. Do a clean sweep. Because if it's in your house, it's going to be in your mouth at some point. You may resist it for today or tomorrow, but it's going to be in your mouth at some point. Okay. So learn to incorporate more whole grains, beans, legumes, things like tofu, nuts, seeds, things like that. Remove the barrier foods that are going to stop you from achieving this. Like, for example, potato chips. Oh my God, what a downfall. I mean, they're not in my house. I don't shop for them. I don't buy them. I don't even look at them. Okay. But if a bowl of potato chips magically appears in front of me, wow, that'll shut me down right there. I can't stop myself, and that's just something I've learned about me, because I just adore potato chips. remove those barrier foods from you, and then swap out and learn, the non-vegan items for vegan alternatives if you want to start down that way. And some of these vegan alternatives are not the best, like these meats, these plant-based meats. It's a better alternative than eating the animal itself, but they're still filled with a lot of oil and salt and sometimes sugar, to make them palatable. So there's a lot of plant-based and vegan options that are becoming mainstream. So, just plan this big kitchen sweep, get it out. And once you clean out the house, the freezer, the fridge, the pantry, get all of that stuff out, and then find 4 or 5 recipes. There's tons of them on the internet. Okay. There's a lot on my website, simplyplantbased.net. Find 4 or 5 that appeal to you, print out the recipe, go to the store and buy the ingredients to make those dishes. And having 4 or 5 dishes made in your house will make you successful because you can open up the refrigerator, pull out prepared food, and just heat it up. So, what do we want to ditch? We want to make sure we get rid of the meat, the fish, the milk, the cheese, yogurts, sour cream, butter, eggs, fake eggs, chicken or beef broths, things like that, and mayonnaise. And there's other things like anything that's like prepared foods, you want to really question them and look at the ingredients on them. Salad dressings, most of them contain a lot of oil and salt. It's easy to make your own, super ridiculous easy. And so there's all, look at those sauces and things that sit on the side of your refrigerator that like sit there for 2 or 3 years, and you touch them once and come back to them again. Get rid of those. Just, start fresh, start clean. So
I just want to say that it is good to get excited. It's a good point you made there, to get excited about the change. And I would say, just picking up on one point about cooking your own food, making your own food, that pick easy recipes when you first get going. And even guys can do this. On a Sunday night, I don't mind having the same thing for dinner for the rest of the week. So making up a big pot of rice and vegetables, for instance, keeping it very simple, rice, vegetable and beans on a Sunday evening, stick it in the freezer. I've got something every single day then that I know what's in there. I know it's good for me, and it stops me, just like anybody else. If you let yourself go hungry, then you're more open to the, as you called it then, the chips, I think you said. I think you mean crisps, but yeah, you said chips.
Jeanne, thank you so much for that. I just wanted to say that was absolutely fantastic, because one of the things that keeps happening for me at the moment is that people keep asking me, well, how do I actually start? So, I was just, I tend to point them towards all sorts of different resources, actually. And I was just wondering if you've got any resources that you could recommend that are really, really good for absolute beginners.
Absolutely. Because if you go on my website, simplyplantbased.net, under videos, after the first section is on COVID, but then after that, it says start here. And so there are 3 in the series: what is whole food plant-based, how to begin, and then tips and tricks. So there's 3 lectures there that are recorded. And also I've connected with Dr. Maria Jose de la Fuente from Bolivia, and we're in the process of creating the plant-based advantage in Espanol. So we've already created plant-based Latino. So we're going to be working and doing it in Spanish. So we've already recorded the top 3, what is it, how to begin, and tips and tricks in Espanol. So she's amazing. She's a bright young thing that gets it, whole food plant-based living. She's just a lovely, lovely person to work with, and just a breath of fresh air on the plant-based scene. It's incredible. So I'm so excited to be working with her, and she gets it. She's a doctor. She gets it. She understands the implications. She's changed her life too. So, while my Spanish is not perfect, I don't do medical Spanish. So that's where she comes in real handy, but thank you for asking.
And I think sometimes when people first start, too many doctors and teachers take too much of a strict purist approach to the actual lifestyle. And all my years of counseling people, I have yet to find anybody who loves deprivation. So when you take something, because if I tell you not to do something, there's a part of your brain that just can't wait to do it. And frankly, to do it in my face if they could. So the bottom line is, I think sometimes understanding substitutions and understanding how to use ethnic cuisine that may not be perfect, but it's still really plant-based, gives you a little bit of options and opens things up a little bit where you feel less confined and deprived, and you're more willing to stay on that path. So I think that's where some of these substitutions come in, although they're not real health foods, these meat substitutes and so on. They do bring people into the fold, at least initially. So as long as you can emphasize that these are not the ideal foods, but they are substitutions for what you were so used to, can actually kind of string you a little bit along where you can become more purist and more focused. And I think there's a certain value in that, because otherwise you can wind up turning somebody off to something that could be very valuable in their life, because in a way you're not teaching them where they are, you're teaching them where you want them to be. And it may not be the same place. You understand what I'm saying? So I think that's where taking advantage of all the ethnic cuisines. That's why I even put the book together with Jayney, the ebook that's on my website, The Plant-Based Guide to Eating Out in the Real World. It takes you through all of these ethnic restaurants and shows these various dishes that cultures have been making over centuries. So why reinvent the wheel? Why not take advantage of some of that as you become more and more pure in your application of clean, fresh fruits and vegetables, steaming things, et cetera, but that kind of gives you a kind of a transitional model for getting into a good place.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Frank, because funny enough, I was just going to say, if you hadn't have done, I was going to say, you've got that fantastic resource on your website. So I think people should take advantage of that, because it really simplifies doing this lifestyle and maintaining normality, which I think is a real problem, because people think, oh, it's kind of freaky, you know, everybody's going to kind of criticize me and I won't get support from my family and so on. But, you know, you can just slide in, if you're going out for dinner with your family, slide in. Nobody's even going to know that you're ordering plant-based necessarily, because it's all actually just really, really easy. And so I like the way that, you know, that you set it up and wrote about that.
All right. Well, thank you for those comments. Appreciate it. Always amazing. So let's move on to Gareth. And why make significant changes? Take it away, Gareth.
Well, yeah, thanks, Jeanne. Yeah, you talked about how there, and Frank's input is really excellent at the end too. I totally go along with that. Having started, I guess, my journey many years ago with my mother using minced soya to make spaghetti bolognese, or, you know, minced soya spaghetti. And I didn't know what it was doing to me at that time. I didn't know it was, you know, bad for me. But hey, you know, it really helped start me off. So it's a good example, Frank. Yeah. I remember seeing a car sticker many years ago which said, death is nature's way of telling us to slow down. And I thought it was really hilarious when I saw that. And I still think it is quite funny, actually. But it also reminded me of a story of a grandfather who was caught with his family in a house. And you may have heard this story, and there was a big flood. And as the house started to get water into the bottom floor, you know, the family decided they probably have to move out because they couldn't stop this water. And the grandfather says, "No way, I'm not moving. You know, God will look after me. He'll save me." He was a religious guy, and the family's got these. You know, they're leaving. They have to leave. They try and get him to go, and he says, "No, I'm going to stay. God will look after me." After a while, you know, the rains keep coming, and he's on the roof. And then these boats come along to rescue him. And he says, no, I'm not getting on the roof. Oh, I'll get on the boat. It's okay. God will come and rescue me. And then this helicopter comes the next day. Same thing. He says, no, I'm not getting in the helicopter. Now, unfortunately, the rains kept coming and the guy died. And he went to heaven. He was pretty mad. So he said when he got up there, he said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, I've been a man of God all my life, and I was hoping that you would look after me and show that to the people, and you didn't. You just left me all by myself to die." And God said, "Hey, come on. You know, I sent a boat, I sent a helicopter. There's only so much I can do." And, you know, for me, that story is reminds me of what it's like with people today who don't realize that they're getting a message on a daily basis, which starts off with, maybe it starts off with a little bit of acid reflux, or it starts off with, you know, I went for a flu. I went to the doctor 3-4 times a year regularly as a kid, and into my early 20s with sinus issues and flu symptoms, and got the penicillin tablets to take for 2 weeks. Maybe it's you know, athletic performance is not quite as good as it was, or you feel fatigued in ways that you didn't before, or maybe you got longer recovery for simple things like cuts. I remember my dad talking to me about that, saying, do you know what, I've had this cut and it just keeps on going, and then it gets bruised underneath, and you know, when I was a younger man, it just, I got over this, I didn't even notice it. Maybe it progresses then to breaking bones and bones becoming brittle. And you hear a lot about this with middle-aged women in particular, where they develop brittle bones. And, you know, I don't believe that we were put on the earth to fall over and have our bones break. Because when we're kids, we're bouncing off the floor. We're falling much bigger distances and much bigger crashes. And just our bodies are able to deal with this. Maybe we move on to other things like, you know, our eyesight disappears or gets bad. Maybe it's even high blood pressure, which I deal with many people with high blood pressure. How you mentioned it, not by name, but I think Frank mentioned earlier, erectile maybe the erectile dysfunction, or even diabetes. And people hear that word, and so often these days, diabetes, most people have no idea how serious diabetes is and what a horrible condition it is, and it will lead to if it's not changed. And then of course we really get into chronic diseases as time goes on, into stroke, heart attack, cancer, a myriad of chronic sicknesses. So in my weird way, these are all messages to us, messages from our body early on, that we need to make changes. And it's a very good reason to move to a plant-based diet. I went and looked up some numbers, you know, chronic sickness deaths from the types of sicknesses I've been talking about there. In America last year, 7 out of 10 deaths, 70% of people dying, was due to a chronic sickness. That is 1.7 million people every year. And that's despite the 75% of the $2 trillion being spent on healthcare. We've got to pay attention to the signs we're getting, okay? Drugs is not going to do it for the vast majority of people. I'm not saying they're never helpful. Of course, they're helpful sometimes, but for the vast majority, they're not going to bring a cure. It's going to much more likely to be your diet and lifestyle issues. Mainly, I would say food. But as you've heard today, walking in a forest, what a great way to improve your happiness and improve your health. So I would say, without going too strong on the what not to do, which is you've mentioned, Jeanne, the animal products and smoking. You haven't mentioned that, but smoking is obviously not a great thing. There is no super elixir of life that we can take to add to put on top of a bad diet, which is going to make a bigger difference. You know, we've got to change the main things, the big things. Stop smoking, do some exercise, and change our diet. Stop eating the dairy and the meat, as you've said. So learning to cook without oil as well is a really big issue for most people, I believe, and that's something that's worth learning. Don't be like, the grandfather who just ignores these signs and ends up dead anyway. I encourage people to go and discover why they should change, and that will really help to be a motivation to stay the path, because we will, as has already been said, we will fall off the path. I fell off many times myself, and I wouldn't say I'm 100% vegan or plant-based today. I'm sure there's things now and again which sneak into my diet. Very rarely, I must say, but don't beat yourself up when that happens. Just get up and get rolling again. I had the news that a mate of mine from 40 years ago, I played football with 40 years ago, died on Tuesday this week. And I don't know, I've lost contact with him many years ago, apart from the odd Facebook message. So I don't know what he what he died from. I know it wasn't an accident. So it was a sickness of some sort. And he's just 60 years, 59 or 60 years old. It's young these days, you know. And because I feel like we've all here, 4 of us, we got a lot more life to live, God willing, you know, apart from an accident. So, but it is up to us to take control of the things we can control, which make a difference, like diet, exercise, going for a walk in the woods. And it's important stuff to you and to your future family. That's what I would say. So I need to get that off my chest today, as you can probably tell.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about your friend, because I know as we start to hear these things, as we're reaching these ages where, you know, you look around and you look at your friends, you know, that you grew up with, and you start to see some of the people and you're like, oh my gosh, or people that have already passed, you know, in their early 50s or 60s, you know, because of health issues. So no, I know it's so important, and people don't realize that you can change your health and your health destiny, even at this age. I mean, I did an interview with Eric Adams, who is the Brooklyn Borough president and currently running for mayor of New York City. And first of all, he's got a new book coming out called Healthy at Last. And he documents in there how he massively changed his health destiny. And not only for him, but his mother was watching. His mother, who was 80 years old and a type 2 diabetic for 30 years and on massive amounts of insulin, you know, every day, injecting herself. And he saw this for 30 years. And she went plant-based. And I think in 4 months, she was completely off, I think, all of her medications, and completely reversed the diabetes, and she wasn't on it anymore. And it's like, wow. So people need to understand, you know, it's better if we can do it when we're younger, you know, and hope our body doesn't wear out or break down in the process of, you know, what we're doing to it. Thank you for sharing.
As we've said before, that good health is worth working for. It isn't a walk in the park, but it is worth working for.
Gareth, thank you so much for that. That was absolutely wonderful. And I couldn't agree more. Obviously, condolences about your friend. And it really does bring it home to you, doesn't it? I lost a very good friend last year, same age as me. And, you know, it just really does kind of give you an extra wake-up call if you needed it, that, you know, these lifestyle measures that we take are just so protective and so important. Mm-hmm. And the good thing is that, you know, we're not just all preaching from the same hymn book, and, you know, and it's all hearsay. There's hard evidence, research data supporting all of this. So if people think that, oh yes, we're just a bunch of wishy-washy vegans who are sort of, you know, kind of all just think it's wishful thinking, it really isn't. So for anybody listening who needs the evidence, the data is absolutely there. Just do a PubMed search, look at my website, look at Frank's website, look at Jean's website, Gareth, all of the data is there. And it's just, you know, it's clear as day.
Well, thank you, Gareth. Always amazing, truly. And let's move on to Dr. Frank, because he's going to be talking about the impact of diet and lifestyle on hormonal function of the thyroid and adrenals, and simple ways to evaluate their function at home. So take it away, Dr. Frank.
One of the nice things about batting cleanup in this presentation is that I get a chance to use and tie together some of the pearls that you already have shared, all of you. You know, when we look and we talk to people, and I talk to a lot of people and work with a lot of people, the things that you constantly hear about are people concerned about the fact that they have no energy, or that they're gaining weight abnormally, especially in parts of the body that they don't want to see it, around the middle or whatever, or they don't understand why their blood sugar is unstable. So we hear a lot of that, and what people don't realize is that all of these functions of the body, from energy to weight to sugar regulation, are a direct outcome of a remarkable orchestration that goes on between the hormonal system, but along with the nervous and the immune system. We now know that the mind-body connection that people always talk about is this incredible synergy and orchestration of all of these systems. And unfortunately, when you learn them in school, you learn them as individual pieces. But the fact of the matter is they don't work that way. So what I'm going to share today is the fact that when we look at the function of the hormonal system, specifically the thyroid and the adrenals, we see some huge relationships that are dramatically affected by the simple ways of plant-based eating or plant-exclusive eating. For example, we know that the adrenal glands are involved as the primary glands of mediating our stress response. So when we encounter stressful situations in our lives, as they become more chronic, the body moves from the alarm phase of fighting or running away into a profound state of exhaustion. And when that exhaustion occurs, the body in its wisdom tries to recruit help. So one part of the endocrine system will now recruit help from another part. In this case, the adrenal glands, as they become more run down, they will begin to recruit the thyroid gland in terms of its metabolic role in energy production. But if that chronic state of stress continues, you will move into a state of more chronic fatigue where both of those organs begin to falter. And unfortunately, as you know, much of our culture teeters on the edge of exhaustion. And instead of getting the rest and the simple things like rest and sleep that we need, what do we typically do? Well, we look for all of the stimulants, coffee, chocolate, and the non sequitur of all time, energy drinks, which have nothing really to do with energy. Because remember, anything that goes up has to come down with equal and opposite force. So all stimulants by their nature only reinforce more exhaustion. And they reinforce thyroid and adrenal exhaustion. And it's very important to realize that the adrenal and thyroid glands are not only regulating that stress response, but they're primary for energy production and weight regulation. So as they become more exhausted, all of us become less able to take weight off and less able to keep it off, even if we take it off. But we live on that roller coaster of stimulation and depression. So that thing has to be broken. The other thing that's very important too is that when you are eating in a conventional way, some very recent work that came out of a very old long-term study, which Jayney and Gareth will be familiar with, is the European Prospective study on cancer and nutrition, which may be the largest study ever done on vegans and vegetarians out of the UK. But researchers in Scotland and researchers as part of that study have shown, for example, that people on the plant-exclusive ways of eating with less animal fat, milk, cheese, eggs, butter, and processed meat will have about 50% less inflammation than omnivores, people eating those kinds of foods. And interestingly, 50% less evidence of slow and low thyroid function. Now, why would that be the case? Well, we're finding that that level of inflammation provided by those processed foods creates an exaggeration of the natural immune response in the body. And remember, inflammation is a very healthy process in the body. It's the way the body heals tissue. It's the way the body protects you against infection. But when we exaggerate that inflammatory outcome by eating, low fiber, concentrated, high fat processed foods, it cranks that immune system up. And those foods also provide a wide range of proteins that the body begins to recognize as antigens, as foreign proteins. So it starts to attack its own tissue. And a case can be made that as that inflammation goes up and that attack goes on, one of the organs that gets remarkably attacked is the thyroid gland. And a classic example of that is if you look at even a product like gluten. One of the things that gluten is made up of is something called gliadin. And gliadin biologically mimics a major enzyme in the body called transglutaminase, which is in a very high level in the thyroid. So when the body attacks that gliadin, it has no choice but to rip its way through that thyroid. And one of the autoimmune outcomes of thyroid disease is a form of disease called Hashimoto's, which is just low thyroid function. But it follows on the heels of this immune exaggeration that is over attacking these organs, whether it's a joint in rheumatoid arthritis or a thyroid gland. So that thyroid attack is very real. And intriguingly, when plant foods are increased, all of the wide range of greens and high fiber, nutrient dense foods, all of the legumes, beans, lentils, peas, grains, greens, all of that immune enhancement exaggeration drops down so that you don't have the antigenic damage to the organs. You don't have the exaggeration of the immune response, again, irritating and damaging these organs. So, people think you have to do these magical approaches to support these glands. But the truth of the matter is just by eating plant exclusive with all of the variety of these plants we're recommending, will provide the nutrients that feed these glands and organs of the hormonal system and allow them not to be beaten down by exaggerated inflammation and exaggerated immune responses. So this is very important because, you know, for the longest time, when you have these problems, they're treated in a way with medication where the idea is nothing can heal these. Like if you have a low thyroid and you go into a physician, he will recommend some form of thyroid medication. And if you say, doc, how long will I be on this? What's the natural response? For life. Because the idea is that you will never be able to heal this problem. We now know that that is absolutely untrue. That by doing stress response management techniques for the stress system, the adrenals can recover. We know that by eating this abundant, high fiber, nutrient dense plant diet, the adrenals and thyroid will remarkably recover. And we also know that we've got to watch other things that affect these organs dramatically. And one of those are some of the industrial chemicals that are in all of our canning and processing. So for example, if you look at bisphenol A in the metal casings of cans, it is an endocrine disruptor. It will deplete the function of the thyroid and the adrenal glands. If you look at glyphosate, pesticides, and some of these chemicals, they will deplete the function of the thyroid and the adrenal glands. So people, you know, eating more organically prepared foods that come from that dirty dozen category, things like cherries and strawberries and celery and potatoes and kale, they need to be really organic because they concentrate pesticides that can damage thyroid and adrenal function. And the clean 15 or the things that are more like broccoli, cauliflower, etc., may not need to be done that way, but I still recommend as much of the organic as you can. And that also means leaving out the GMO foods that are going to be most sprayed with glyphosate, weed killers, and the like. People do not understand how much those chemicals can deplete the function of these hormonal systems, these glands that are doing their job. And again, when we look at the thyroid specifically, we know that to make thyroid hormones, you need the amino acid tyrosine, but you need the mineral iodine. So I find that it can be very useful in the vegan diet to add some sea vegetables, or to take a little bit of something like dulse or kelp powder and sprinkle it, even a quarter to a half a teaspoon on a salad or on something that you're making as a casserole. We know that, for example, selenium is a very important mineral for the stability of the thyroid. Believe it or not, one Brazil nut a day satisfies all the selenium needs of the human body. I find that remarkable, just one. In fact, if you're taking 3 or 4 Brazil nuts, you can actually over-exaggerate selenium intake. So, you know, you're getting these minerals beautifully from this plant-exclusive approach. You're getting rid of these pesticides and industrial chemicals. You're reducing inflammation, which directly impacts these glands. And you're working on factors of exhaustion with better sleep, less stimulants, etc., to allow these glands, like the adrenal glands, to recover their normal healthy function. All right. And so to really look at that, though, there are 2 simple tests that can be done at home that a lot of people are not aware of. And they're actually very good because they will give you an indication of both thyroid and adrenal function without having to go through all the blood work. It's very common with thyroids that many times you can do blood work and it looks like the hormones and the TSH levels, the stimulating hormone for the thyroid, look relatively normal, but you know somehow that person looks like they're functioning with a low thyroid. They're losing hair, their skin is drying out, they're putting weight on for no apparent reason sometimes, their energy levels are very low. So, you know, all of that is indicative of low thyroid function, but it doesn't always necessarily show clearly on blood work. There was an old physician called Broda Barnes, who was an endocrinologist who for about 60 years treated thyroids. And after all of those years of treating thyroids, he wrote a book called The Thyroid. Okay, so if anyone could have written the book, it was him. He created what's called the axillary temperature measurement. You take any plain thermometer, but it has to be a shakedown thermometer. It's got to have a column. Now, they don't do mercury anymore, but they still have some column thermometers. You shake it below 97 degrees, and before you get out of bed in the morning, you just stick it in your armpit and hold it there for 10 minutes. You record that temperature for about 5 days. The normal range of that temperature is between 97.8 and 98.2. It's about a degree colder than the regular, oral or rectal temperature. If that temperature is below that range and certainly below 97, you have a functional thyroid problem, whether you know it or not on the blood work. And then you can adjust the diet, you can adjust the lifestyle, getting rid of all those stimulants and so on. The other thing to check that the adrenals, this is a very simple test. If you lay down and take a normal blood pressure, and then you rise to a standing position, when you stand, that blood pressure should go up about 6 to 8 or 10 points in just the transition to standing. The noradrenaline of the adrenals play a role in constricting blood vessels so that you can get more pressure in blood into the brain when you change position. If you stand and your blood pressure stays the same or drops, you have a functionally low thyroid. That test is called the Ragland effect. And anybody can do that at home, and it would give you an indication, at least a little power to see, is my endocrine system supporting me on those basic functions of body temperature? Remember, the thyroid is your furnace. It's what generates energy. It burns fuel. It's one of the things that creates body temperature even. So by measuring axillary temperature, you can get a little bit of a home measurement for where you stand, and you can also, by looking at simple blood pressure, get an idea of where the adrenals are for you. But the truth of the matter is, if you see the symptoms that I recommended, you're waking up very tired, you have very little energy to get through the day, you're losing hair, you're putting on abdominal weight gain or belly fat and weight gain for no apparent reason, skin is drying out, energy is low, you're really looking at the function of thyroid and adrenal. But the hopeful message, the great news, is that by moderately getting activity, some good stress response management, and eating this plant-exclusive diet high in high fiber, high nutrient-dense foods that reduce inflammation and support the endocrine and immune system in their consort, in the orchestrated way that they work to create the outcome of hormonal function, you've got all that power within your reach.
Wow. Frank, that was amazing. I did not know about those 2 little tests that you could do at home. Thank you for sharing that. That is amazing.
And in fact, we do those tests. I do those tests in the office. So when people come in, if I want to do just an adrenal screen, I just take blood pressure in 3 positions, laying, sitting, and standing right in a row. And then I look at how that changes.
Wow, that is amazing. Because I know my doctor looked at me straight in the eye, handed me the prescription and said, here's the medication. And I looked down at the prescription and it had 4 refills. And I'm like, Doc, how long am I supposed to be on this? And she's like, the rest of your life. And I said,
There's another test that you can't do it yourself, but your doctor can. It's called a Rogoff sign. And that is when you shine light in the eye, the pupil will constrict or the iris gets bigger. If the eye cannot hold that constriction, that's another sign of adrenal dysfunction too. That's why you'll notice people with adrenal dysfunction or low adrenals, they have a very severe light sensitivity. If they go out, they're squinting. They just can't handle daylight as much.
Would that have an impact on nighttime driving?
Well, not as much. That's another issue. This is really more about normal daylight sensitivity, but it's an inability of the pupil to hold the constriction in the presence of light shining in it. And it's called a Rogoff sign. So those little signs clinically are very easy monitors that people can use. Now, they're not the be all and end all, because then you can follow up with your doctor with a blood workup or something else if you really want to pursue it deeper. But the beautiful thing now, knowing from the research like the EPIC Oxford study and all of those beautiful studies that have looked at people over a long time eating plant-based, to see the impact of plant-based eating on dramatically eliminating sluggish thyroids and inflammation and all of that is something for people to reckon with. It's really beautiful.
Well, I would be remiss if I did not point out Dr. Neal Barnard wrote a book called Your Body in Balance, and it is all about your thyroid.
He's got a tremendous amount of useful information in that book. Absolutely. I recommend it highly.
Lovely to hear you talking about that stuff. I can tell, it inside out. You've dealt with people you know, many times with that. So you have experience in that area. It's so cool. And rather than worry that I don't know all the you know, the detail of the stuff yourself, Jayney and Jeanne go through, I'm just grateful for people like myself. I just got to make one decision, you know, eat plant-based.
It's like I tell
Thank
people,
you.
I say, when I used to lecture, and this is a joke, but I used to lecture, and I tell people, how many of you know all of the physics of the internal combustion engine? And of course, some smart ass would put up his hand occasionally, you know, but for the most part, they would just say, mm. And then I'd say, how many of you drive a car? So what you need is you need a key, put it in the ignition, turn it and drive off. The key is this plant exclusive lifestyle. You don't need to know all that. Now, those of us that have spent most of our lives amassing a certain amount of knowledge, what you come to realize is the more you think you know, the less you really know, because things are always changing in the body and we're always learning new pathways and new systems. I personally like that dance, but you don't need to do that dance to be successful with this approach. That's the beauty of it. It's so basic, it's so profound, it's so simple, and it's so the way things work best in the body, that by just embracing that lifestyle of plant exclusive eating has so many benefits beyond our intellectual capacity that all we need to do is just adopt it. As you say, it's a simple choice, in my opinion.
Mine too. Great stuff.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. You're always amazing. Incredible information about the thyroid. And you out there, thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions you'd like us to dive into, please message us through our Facebook, social media, or our website, healthchangers.net, where you can see the other episodes of what we've already recorded. If you need help, all of us here can help you along your journey. Your health is worth working for. Make every bite count, every action count, and we'll see you in the next video.